Welcome back to Techtulia. We are filming here, if you're watching on video, at Wiseline's Wiseline's main office in Guadalajara, Mexico. We're up on the 5th floor, and we have Guadalajara back in the background. Today, Vidal and I are here, and we're going to be talking about businesses formed around data and how people should be thinking about how data can make their businesses more valuable.
Yeah, I like it. Vidal Gonzalez, ready to be asked some questions and discussing them.
The way this podcast episode came about is that Vidal recently gave a talk about this subject, and so I'm gonna be going through, and we're gonna just kind of review some of the things. So what would you say is the main thesis that people should take away, from that talk or from this episode, about how to build companies with data?
Well, first I'd like to say that I was watching a phenomenal talk by Andrew Ng on YouTube called the State of Artificial Intelligence. And the main gist of it is data is king. And that's what this episode will be about, is that the way to build defensible business in the era of AI is through data, right?
All right, so let's break. I think that's a great thesis. Let's break down that statement into a few parts. Right. What do you mean by defensibility? Because obviously, if you run a software business in the Silicon Valley, you have to have a defensible business. But what do you think it means to people who haven't lived that for many years?
So I believe is in knowing that what will be the key advantage for your business in the future is in the way you can be strategic about gathering data, storing it, and making use of it.
But in particular, let's just start from the basics. Yeah. What does it mean to defend a business? What does it mean to have a moat around your business?
So it means that you build enough leverage compared to your competitors in a certain specific field around data. Let's put it in very simple examples. Let's think of a company that builds refrigerators. Okay. Basically, just a square box that cools things, right? The way you should think about making your business defendable is, it's not to obviously it is to build the best refrigerator out there, but it is also about instrumenting every single refrigerator with a way to get data back into your systems.
Okay,
right?
So that's how you would talk about having a data advantage in a business. For instance, I think Tesla's a much better example than probably the smart refrigerators. Yeah. Tesla knows, and we talked about this in several episodes so far, but it's a good example. When Tesla puts a car on the road, it's collecting a bunch of data about how that car is working,
right?
Which makes it easier to iterate faster, right? But I think, in any business, there is a defensibility, which means that you have some advantage that your competitors won't have,
right,
because of your operating business. So, for instance, if you were making refrigerators, you could have a brand. So it's a Westinghouse or a Sears refrigerator, some business where, hey, look, there's a lot of refrigerators here, but I've heard of Westinghouse.
Right.
So I'm gonna buy that refrigerator. Your competitors can't come in and lower their prices or do anything against that because your brand creates that defense.
Yeah.
And then, if you want to just look at the early days of capitalism and hey, I have a factory. Right. It takes $1 million to build a refrigerator factory, but then I can produce refrigerators at a certain cost.
Yeah.
Now, if you come in and you want to compete with me, you have to spend $1 million just to start playing the game.
But isn't it, and here's my counter argument to that, isn't it so that globalization and the improvements in productivity will lower the barrier of entry for refrigerator manufacturing, which proves, solidifies the point of Andrew, which is, in the future, in the era of AI, the data is what will defend the business, because it will not be about whether you can produce the goods to service your market. It's whether can you have enough data so that you produce AI systems that will in turn give you better products. But I'm kind of jumping into conclusions.
I think I think that's very much why we need to talk about data for every business, but
Right.
especially those businesses that have strong consumer relationships,
Yep.
or have a lot of transactions, or even produce physical goods that need to be monitored to give you an edge. I think all of these places, data and having that advantage in data starts to become very valuable, but it can't just be data on its own.
Right.
But you do need to start focusing on new defensible areas for your business. If you're a media, it can't just be, hey, I produce a newspaper
Exactly.
because, oh, I didn't know anything about BuzzFeed 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Now BuzzFeed's a thing.
Exactly.
And so building a brand is easier than it's ever been.
Yep.
Building goods is easier than it's ever been. And so if you're a media business, you're going from thinking about, hey, how do I protect my brand or enhance my brand through content? And a lot of them have started thinking, how do I collect more data around my users so I can create new differentiated businesses? Like, News Corp has one, Mansion Global.
Yep.
And that's about taking, hey, some of our most valuable readers are, multimillionaires, and they like buying mansions.
Yeah.
And so they created a special brand around mansions. And then on the other hand, you have collecting data so that you can build an advertising network.
Yep.
And so you can, if you have a consumer who is a multimillionaire in Manhattan, hey, here's some interesting info about mansions, about sports cars, about boats or whatever.
Yeah.
And if, the person's, living in a suburb in the Midwest, you're going to say, hey, well, here's, a Netflix subscription or other things. You're changing what advertisements or what products you're giving them based on what you know about them, which starts to get into, and so I'm just because a concrete example of how a brand and content defensibility has migrated in that industry into data.
Yeah. Do you want to discuss the case of Google Maps, for example? Which is, I think
let's use Google Maps as another example.
As an example, I was reading this article, which, by the way, the guy that wrote it, we'll probably link it in the description, is saying how big of a moat, and a moat is, to guess, piggyback on Game of Thrones or something. A moat is those things that old castles or castles used to have to prevent people from getting closer to it, which is building a barrier or a what do you call the water thing?
That is the moat.
That is the moat.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so you just dig a hole and fill it with water. Yeah.
Exactly. So the moat for Google Maps is the amount of data about the physical world that they possess. First of all, think of Google Earth. That project that started back in the early 2000s and almost nobody was paying attention to, right now is one of the key data acquisition strategies through satellites that Google has to enhance Google Maps. I don't know if you've seen in this article that dissects the way Google has been doing it, but Google is even, through satellite data and AI, building an almost realistic model of buildings seen from above, where, for example, if this building has an HVAC system on the roof,
which it does.
right? Which it does, but
it'll show that
only you and I know. A Google Street View car roaming around the street doesn't know. The satellite is the only one that can tell. But when you transform that into computer-generated models or vectors, that's what maps use, the only way to infer that that's an HVAC and to model it correctly and not thinking, oh, that was an umbrella, actually not an HVAC system, is through AI, knowing that many HVAC systems on top of buildings look the same or have similar patterns.
So I think with the examples that you've given, obviously Google Maps is a massively valuable business. Whether or not it's super highly profitable as it can be, I don't even think they monetize it really to the extent that they could.
Right.
Which is a kind of ongoing theme for a lot of Google side projects. If you're printing money, do you really want to try hard to print a little more? But I think it's massively valuable product, and to replicate it would take years. I mean, Apple Maps is like famously a bad version of Google Maps.
Exactly.
And one of their main guys at Apple got fired over it.
Yeah.
And they had to bring somebody in new, and it's just starting to get to the point where the quality of Apple Maps in San Francisco is as good as the quality of Google Maps literally anywhere else in the world.
And you touched on a great point that I think we should probably continue to discuss after the break because it's a key one. Apple has the same engineering and technology capacity as Google does for building routing for maps and navigation. Yet they're years away from achieving what Google has achieved.
Let's discuss that next. We'll take a little break where the pew, 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 noises will play, and you can mentally refresh yourself, and we'll see you in a few minutes. Okay, so in this segment, I think we're going to be discussing examples of rivalries between companies where clearly one has the advantage in data.
Yeah.
And examine, I think we'll start with Apple Maps versus Google Maps, where
Yeah.
it's clear over the past 2-3 years that Apple is not able to catch up to Google.
Yeah.
And that could be a lot of things. But their existing data, their knowledge of buildings, their knowledge of the best routes,
Yep.
I think is a strong advantage. But let's maybe also try to find some examples, I think, where people think data is a defense,
Right.
and it might not be as big a defense as people expect.
Okay.
But so I mean, let's break down like all the different factors that are pro and against Google and Apple.
Mm-hmm.
And like try to suss out where is data making the key difference in this particular thing, because Google has engineering,
Yeah.
Google has obviously Android where it's distributing its maps,
Yeah.
but iPhone has the same thing on the other side. It has
Yeah.
fantastic software and hardware engineering, both for collecting data and obviously distributing it on the iPhone. So it's kind of even. How has Apple Maps struggled so much compared to Google Maps?
Because I think that data, I'm going to get philosophical in here, but data is a pure thing. It's a very pure and noble thing, meaning you cannot fake data. I mean, you can buy it potentially, but the fact that Google has invested years of people inputting data, heck, even if here in Guadalajara, and I'm going to disclaim something about Guadalajara driving, we suck, but Google will learn from its users. I know that Google will route me in Guadalajara through turns that are not legal. You know why they do that? Because Google is learning from its users, right? And Google is discovering routes, better routes, or more efficient routes because their users are producing a tremendous amount of data, both through just driving, right? Traffic data, data around where people are parking, popular places for parking and things like that. And that you cannot fake it. You cannot buy it, right? And not only that, but the amount of time and effort that Google has put in Google Street View, and then putting those images through some machine learning, right? Now it's when machine learning starts to be your competitive advantage. Remember that Google tried to acquire Yelp and it didn't work, right? Now Google, through roaming the world and applying machine learning, they probably have the images of every business in the street, the name of the business, the phone that you can call, and start the beginning of what Yelp built through walking every single city.
Yeah, I think, there's like a meme online of like cars stuck in a tree and it's like Apple Maps.
There you go.
Like a car like in the second story of a house, like, oh, Apple Maps, because the routing on Apple's so bad. And so, yeah, you can go in and buy it. And I think the economics are really interesting here because if, when Google first started collecting all of this data with cameras, they paid a lot of money to do that.
It did.
Right? And it gave them an initial advantage.
And it takes time.
But now, like for instance, they have like these self-driving cars or whatever that they have roaming around, and they have airplanes and satellites and things like that.
Yeah.
But then they also have like the billions of users of Google Maps around the world. They're collecting that data for free now.
Yeah.
And so if Apple wants to catch up, it doesn't have the users. So it has to pay much more than Google paid to get started.
Yeah.
Because it's not catching up to where Google was in 2008. It's catching up to where Google is now. And where Google is now requires 1 billion users.
Yeah.
And that's almost impossibly expensive.
Yeah. And I believe that, for example, going back to the case of where data is king, talk about cars, navigation, the physical world. I mean, I believe that not even Tesla potentially will be the holder of all of the information and data that will allow self-driving cars to be a reality. It might be that big companies, the companies building sensors, will battle for the rights to the data that their sensors get to collect, right? Rather than the provider of the actual vehicle.
Well, and I think that is a very interesting topic. And so I want to focus in on self-driving cars as an example of an industry where I think a lot of people expect there to be a data moat.
Yeah.
But it might not turn out how you think.
Okay.
So Google has driven like millions of miles with these very fancy LiDAR rangefinders, right? And so what LiDAR does is it spins around on the top of the car and it shoots out a laser, and the laser is reflected. And so there's a camera that finds reflected. And that's very effective at giving you a specific, exactly how far away each thing is. And so you build up all of these scan lines, and you get, and you combine it with images, you get like full 3D, perfect. And so everyone expected that was going to be a very hard thing to catch up on because Google had been doing it for years, combined with its Street View data. And they thought, well, that's going to be the next data moat that's going to create for Google a similar data differentiation or data moat that it has against Apple Maps, against any newcomer in the self-driving, because Lyft is making self-driving cars. Cruise, which is a GM company now, is making self-driving cars valued at $10 billion. Tesla is making self-driving cars is valued at $35 billion, which seems kind of low. I don't know how much should Tesla be worth. Like, it's so hard to tell. But Elon Musk comes out, and how much can you believe Elon Musk? Who knows? But he says, look, actually, what we've done is we have cameras, not the LiDAR, not the expensive sensor, but we're just using plain old cameras and some radar and some other stuff. But we believe that gives us much more ability to predict than Google's fancy data. We're using a probably worse form of data because Google already had all these images. But the fact that they're installed on every Tesla for the last 5 years has had these cameras, they believe that data set. And so their way that the data itself is not necessarily valuable if Tesla can figure out a way to produce all of the same information instead of from these fancy LiDAR scanners on top, from just plain images. And there's papers coming out where they take out all of the physical disformations from a camera, from a single camera, and they can actually, with even fancier computation, get back full 3D images from the camera moving every millisecond. It gets a different angle, and so it kind of builds up the same 3D, but it's much more computation than the LiDAR. The LiDAR gives it back that data directly, and so it's like you think, okay, Google's got the advantage in data, they're the winners. But actually, it's not determined until long after the fact what that pure data is. What the ground truth will eventually be determined by.
And so what Andrew says in his talk, which I think is like, it's just a piece of brilliance, is companies need to have a way to strategically acquire data. And not only that, but need to put it in a single place, like a single warehouse where all this data lives. Because if you have it in a very disjointed way, where that department in a big company has some piece of data and this other department has another piece of data, you won't have a good way in a centralized manner to run a ton of experiments on that data. And I believe that that's very key because we talked on this podcast about DevOps. We talked about platform thinking. And what Andrew says is that in the era of AI, the algorithms or the technology to run experiments and build machine learning algorithms that will give you the competitive advantage feed off of data. And machine learning algorithms will be so open, meaning open source, right, and available to you. You will not, as a company, you will not develop a better machine learning algorithm than the next company. That's not going to be the way you compete. The way you compete will be just use what's existing out there, right? I mean, all these technologies like TensorFlow will probably create libraries of neural networks that are very specialized and solve one single thing. Just use that. That's not your business. Your business is to say, how can I gather data in a way that my competitors can't? I have a competitive advantage through the gathering of data.
I'm skeptical of that.
All right.
And not to say that like there aren't going to be a lot of companies where that analysis is going to perform very well. It's just that there's going to be a lot of companies that have collected a ton of data and have access to the best algorithms. But, you know, if you have a moat but you don't have a castle, you know, you're just a guy sitting in the middle of a lake, you're still going to get run over, right? Like you there has to be a lot else behind a successful business. I think this is maybe a necessary condition going forward.
Yeah.
You need a data advantage. It's a necessary condition in a lot of fields, but it's not a sufficient condition. There's going to be other things that you need. And let me pitch something to you. I'll do it on our for the first time on our podcast, which we're distributing publicly. That's the best time to test ideas. But I think a lot of people think about data collection in the abstract. I would like to think instead of collecting data is perfecting transactions. And what I mean by a transaction is, right, like if Uber picks me up in a car, right, or Google gives me a direction on a map, that is a complete delivery of value to the customer, which both produces data and relies on data, right? So Uber can't route a vehicle to me unless they know how many vehicles they need in that area. They put them in that area, they send it to me, and then they need to route me to my final location, and they need to reroute all the other cars so that they have the right amount in every other place. So it's a holistic way of developing an analysis, right? You don't want to just say, hey, how much data does Uber have on where people like to pick up cars?
Right.
It goes along with both systems of routing cars, putting them on the street, and then you actually need the person to buy it as well, right? And for Google Maps, you know, if you have all this data but people aren't using it in their car, they don't have their map turned on, they're not using it to route themselves, you know, all the data in the world is not going to do you much. And even if Apple was just suddenly gifted all that data, they broke into Google servers and stole it all, they would still need people to have a brand awareness that Google Maps or Apple Maps is better, and to be continually updating all that information as streets change and traffic changes and all of that. So instead of thinking about, hey, I want to collect data, think I want to have a series of repeatable transactions with users that both enhance. It's a feedback cycle. After each transaction, I have a little bit more edge than I did right before. Right. And I think that's a much better way of breaking down, because, you know, there's all these companies like insurance companies where they say, you know, you have a CIO from an insurance company come out and say, hey, look, I got a huge amount of data.
Right.
There's going to be a big difference between the CIO who has a huge amount of data, because they're all going to have a huge amount of data, and the innovative one who comes in and says, okay, this is how we're going to enable each of the transactions. You know, we're going to lower our costs, the cost of our plans relative to our competitors, while still making more money because we've done a better job of actuarially deciding how much an insurance plan should cost. And you know, we're targeting advertisements on Facebook to people who have especially low chances of getting in car accidents for our new car insurance, right? Like, those are transactions that can be evaluated. And each time you get a new person from Facebook, you learn, actually, Britney Spears fans are extraordinarily dangerous, while Taylor Swift fans are very good drivers for whatever reason. You know, you're exploring and gaining more knowledge.
Interesting. Your choice of music your choice of music being a direct correlation with your ability to drive. That would be interesting.
I mean, how many text messages you send? Like, if you could go into Facebook and look at their wall and it's like, lol, driving right now.
Rush hour texting, you're not going to get a good insurance rate.
Exactly. But, you know, it's not, you know, I like the idea of data as pure, and I really agree with what you say. You can't fake it. That's what defines the purity. But it's not a fluid. It's not just something you can pour in your tank.
No, it's not.
And if you could think about instead, hey, what is my way of repeatably going back to the well and repeatably refreshing that relationship, which relies on data, And it's not just I'm selling something to somebody and then forgetting about them, but I'm repeatedly interacting with them in a way that enhances my moat.
Yeah. So if we go back to this amazing talk by Andrew, he kind of builds on that point, which is he says you first need to have a little bit of data to then build your first product. And a little bit of data for your first product might be, you know what? I've seen that the insurance industry is doing X and could be optimized in this certain way. You have very little data, which is probably enough data to form an opinion or a theory that there's something there.
Well, why don't we stop? Okay. We'll take a little break.
Okay.
And when we come back, why don't you give us some advice on how to implement a strategy that will collect data in a valuable way?
What is that?
All right, so in the last segment here of the podcast, we've broken down so far kind of what it means to have a data moat.
Yeah.
We've given some examples of where it can be effective or not effective, and maybe some ideas of what a data moat actually would look like in real life. But let's say that you do have a lot of data at your company.
Yeah.
Or you're starting a new company. What are going to be some of the techniques, like the very tangible things that people should be doing? Because it's not magic. I mean, a lot of times it's just simple stuff, right?
Yeah.
So where do you get started?
So I believe it should be like Andrew says, right? So you first have a strategic way to capture data. And what he says is that you should be running the virtuous cycle of software. I believe he even mentions it like that, which is you have a little bit of data, then you use that data to say, I think there's a product here. You build a product with a minimum amount of data. Once you build that product, you get some users. And by operating that product with those users, you'll be generating more data. Yeah. Once you generate more data, you then improve that product, which in turn gives you more users, which gives you more data. If you run that cycle, that circle, enough times, you will have a way to generate a tremendous amount of data that will give you a competitive edge.
I think that's like a really good point too, because sometimes when we talk to people that are looking to use data, they think of data as something that they already collected in the past.
Right.
And so they're very limited in how they think about how they can use data in the future. But when you think about collecting data from users, what the advantage is that you could always instrument, whether it's an application, whether it's a website, whether it's a messaging. There's anything you do, you can collect more data, and you can find ways to collect more data in the future.
Yeah.
So even if you never collected, someone's driving habits, you can say, hey, well, going forward, based on this new product, let's instrument it in a way that does collect that data. And I think was that what you mean by strategic data collection?
Exactly. And strategic in this context means what data can I gather to improve my product, which in turn will improve the experience of the users, which in turn will give me better data. That's why it's a virtuous cycle. It's not a vicious cycle. It's like, whatever, just data, give me more data, because it's obviously the wrong thing. Obviously, companies think that they generated a tremendous amount of data. We get manufacturing companies sometimes telling us that we need to help them with their AI strategy. And yes, they have data because they've been collecting it for the past 20 years. It doesn't mean that data will be key to your business, right?
No, when I used to be a data scientist, that was like the common thing. Hey, Matt, here's a bunch of data. It's a lot. And they would use some number of bytes. They would be like, it's 100 gigabytes of data. Can you find something useful there? It's like, and
sometimes you will be surprised.
Sometimes there's some stuff in there that was very cool that everyone loved, and like that was easily extracted. But like, it starts to be like drawing blood from a stone. Like no matter how much more work you do, you're not gonna find, like people like machine learning on this data set. Like, the correlations will pop out. Like maybe they're just not there. Maybe you didn't collect enough data initially. Maybe there's just nothing. Maybe you need to change user behavior to generate correlations. But like, it's not about going in and handing a data scientist, I got you 100 terabytes of data now. You should be able to get something. It's like, maybe not. Or maybe I just was bad at it. But
no, I don't think so.
But I think that was why, as a in my career, I was like, gravitated much more towards product. And I think it's better to have your data strategy focused on how are we going to change what we're doing with the user and how we're collecting data at the point that they're using our product,
Yeah.
rather than just relying on, hey, we have a 150 billion gigabytes of data on how much the machines were vibrating. It's
Exactly.
like, who knows
Yeah.
what that means? You might want to look at like simpler stuff that's maybe not a lot of data,
Yeah.
but you have a strategy that goes and finds what are those really important things that we need to learn and find a way to collect it.
And not only that, also that you need to have a kind of unified data warehouse. And the reason for that is, let's say a soda manufacturing company has a ton of data of how many times they put the cap on the bottle and it works or it doesn't. Mm-hmm. I'm like, all right, that's great. How does that affect the experience of the user? Oh, I don't know how many complaints I got on lot X. I'm like, all right, so, I mean, if that data doesn't live in the same place for a group of individuals to run a ton of experiments to try to say, this data correlates with this other data, and just your strategy is, yes, I want to be strategic and want to capture data, but it's actually in that department has some data, and that other department, the marketing department, has actually different data, and it's very difficult to unify it, to tell a story. What good do you have to have a strategic way to gather data? So the second point is to build a unified data warehouse. And you have a lot of experience in that. I believe it's like the key aspect that even the biggest players in technology still struggle to get right.
Yeah, and that does take some planning around what's my data format,
right?
What's my ETL strategy,
yep,
and then but it's once it's all in and I think this is like the big change that's happened over the last 10 years in how people think about data. It used to be very expensive to store data and to process it.
Mm-hmm.
Now it is very, very cheap.
Right.
And when you develop a new product, don't think, how do I collect exactly the right data? It's like, just collect everything. Just make sure it's very structured.
Yeah.
You want very clean, very nice data so that you can just say, hey, we have data from 20 different departments. Let's mash it together.
Yeah.
If one of those departments is inputting trash, which is, and you always see these, like, not just my experience, but many, and I've worked at very good companies that have very good data, but you see people, like 99% of the time, your data scientist or your machine learning team, they're just going in and cleaning data.
Yeah.
Because, we have different formats, or sometimes this data is here, sometimes it doesn't register. And focusing on the point of data collection and bringing everything into a common format in a nice, clean data set, that's a good starting point. And I think that's where people should often just focus on
and
having fewer errors.
One last thing that I would say is, at least focused on having the ability to tell stories about how your users use your product through data.
Yeah.
Right? At least have the ability to say, I know what my users did from point A to point B and what outcome did they achieve with that.
And you think about we have some friends that run a data company and Liftoff,
right?
Which and their original thesis, and they've developed this in a couple other directions, but original thesis was just like, hey, when you download a mobile app, or do you actually install it? Do you actually because the other ads would just say, hey, as soon as they go to the app store, I get paid as an ad provider. I'm displaying your ad. But really what you want is for them to download the app and then for them to sign up for it. And then are they a subscription? What's their lifetime value, right? And if you collect much more data on the entire transaction,
mm-hmm.
not just the initial part,
right?
But if you say, what's the full loop that we're going to run through in our product development cycle with the user? Where is their whole journey? And you instrument that entire thing. Then you can do stuff like optimizing for how much money we make rather than how many people accidentally click and go to the app store but never buy our app.
Yeah. And I believe that even in the area of analytics software, things like Mixpanel are kind of putting up a good battle to the Google Analytics, because these analytics tools have been able to help companies tell better stories about their users than, here's Google Analytics, and I guess I can tell you very isolated ways of how users have used your product, but it's on you to do all the heavy lifting. So the more, I guess, modern analytic company or software as a service analytics companies have been able to tell better stories about the users, and that's how they've been able to display some of the key players like Google Analytics?
So I think the main strategies are clean data, put it all in the same place, focus on instrumenting the entire user cycle. If you have all of that data in the same place in a nice structured way, then you're really ready to start evaluating, hey, what is the real critical points with our users? And then start to run that feedback cycle that we talked about, which is every time you have a new user, they benefit from the data, but then they also increase your data advantage by giving you all of that lifecycle data that you can use for the next run, whether it's Google Maps or a smart refrigerator.
And only then, it's not like it's a sequential process, but only then when you have run that cycle, you can really experiment and reap the benefits of AI. Before that, you'll probably be confused and probably invest a lot of dollars in trying to benefit from AI.
And this is where, if you go back to episode 6, lean is going to help you a lot. If you have a lean development cycle that is really focused on continuously getting that feedback, or a DevOps focused product development strategy, if you're really getting that feedback quite often and you have the ability to quickly iterate on the product experience as well as the data collecting, but the UI and the application that you're delivering, that's when you really start to get that virtuous cycle accelerating. Is that it's not just collect the data and then look at it, but quickly making iterative product improvements.
Yeah.
But that doesn't happen if you have a transaction that takes 4 years.
Yeah.
Like if you're Ford and you sell a car and they come back every 5 years and buy a new car, and that's the cycle. You think about it as a customer journey as a big circle, and your circle it takes 40 years to go around the loop, versus Tesla, where they release a new feature, it makes the car better, and then they're a couple weeks later they can release a second version because they have over the air. So by taking whatever industry you're in and reducing that customer value loop to maybe not just include purchases, but hey, are we increasing, how long does it take someone to make coffee? Hey, we introduced a new screen, and that went from taking 10 minutes to make coffee to 8 minutes. I don't work for coffee companies. I don't know. Okay. Well, I think
that was a good chat.
That's good.
So where are Tacos Juan now? You sent me a text the other day.
No. It's very important. Update. Flash. Can we get on the video some maybe like news flash?
Yeah.
Like some bright red button. Something like that. News flash. Tacos Juan is now open past 3:30. It's open
in Providencia, right?
The one in Providencia.
Yeah.
It's open to 10:30. I have not walked over to the one in Santa Teresa, but
Santa Teresa, yeah.
But it's open till 10:30. And if you're a listener of the show and you've made it all the way to the end of this episode, you'll remember that tacos barbacoa are generally a breakfast food.
And that was my main point. They should be served for dinner as well. Thank you, Tacos Juan. You're not only having one of the best products in the market, you're also innovating in how this product should be consumed.
Well, look, they spend a lot of money to sponsor this show.
Thank you.
The tens of thousands of dollars a week the check that I get from Tacos Juan is ridiculous. That's how I finance my lifestyle, which is, quite luxurious.
Yeah.
But they listened to the show. They heard us.
Yeah.
And they said, let's serve tacos all day. And McDonald's did it 2 years ago.
Look where they are.
And it really did help the bottom line.
Of course.
Breakfast all day at McDonald's works. I think now Tacos Juan is in a position to challenge McDonald's globally.
And it's an example of having data about your users and how they consume your product being a competitive advantage to your other barbacoa taco.
Well, yeah, when I show up
spots.
at 3 p.m. and we already shut down the grill. Like, come on.
Yeah.
That's your data point.
There you go.
Every time like some guy drives, like when you have like this guy who can barely speak Spanish coming over and saying, hey, where's the tacos at 3 p.m. and you're like, oh, we already closed it down. And maybe that's telling you something that you could sell some tacos a little later in the day, because I didn't know that they're only supposed to be at breakfast.
There you go.
And maybe I'm right. Maybe they should be all day. But they also have added a new menu. And so I'm assuming they're going to sell barbacoa because, like, come on.
I mean, what else
the
would
grill's
they do?
there. No, but they have a whole dinner menu now too. So they're not just going to, it's not just going to be barbacoa. Hopefully, I don't know. I have not gone past 4 p.m. So listeners of the show, big news. When you go, tell them code Tectulia They will not give you any discount or know what you're talking about. But use the code. Use the code. Just say, hey.
Give it a shot.
Give it a
might
shot.
be surprised. We'll be like confused and say like, yeah, here's a taco.
They actually do not send us money, but if enough people go in and start saying Techtulia, maybe they'll start listening, responding to our emails.
You might get lucky.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see you soon. If you're listening online, hopefully, I know we haven't put up the YouTube video as quickly as we could, but hopefully we'll start getting the YouTube videos out right when we have the episode. And the YouTube, you'll be able to see us and leave comments, press like, subscribe, all that stuff if you like. Because sometimes you want video, sometimes you don't.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. See you next time.